You guys, should I do something that starts a little more upbeat and then gets depressing, or go straight for depressing all the way down? And the consensus was at 10 o'clock in the morning, let's start a little more upbeat. About 10 or 15 years ago, I started doing something which is really weird when you're a science fiction writer, which is I started setting stories in places on Earth where I'd actually lived. This one is set in central Ohio. And so it has that quality for me of literally being places I've been, which is kind of weird, since none of the rest of it has happened to me. But I really, the first line is, I was an aggravated bride. And that's, oddly enough, something that came to me in a dream. Nothing comes to me in dreams. I always wanted to be one of those writers whose story came to, nothing comes to me in dreams. Right, dreams are usually things like, I'm in a room with a bunch of people I work with, except some of them are not really people I work with. I know in the dream that I work with them, even though I don't know who they are, except the room is actually an elevator, and we open and we're in a garage. My dreams do not track. But when I wrote After the Apocalypse, when I came up with the title After the Apocalypse, a lot of these stories are not actually end-of-the-world stories. The apocalypses are much more personal. So this is a story in which the apocalypse is much more personal, and it's called Honeymoon. And let me know if you can't hear me. I was an aggravated bride. It was a little after 1 in the morning, I guess. We were supposed to be on our way to the Hampton Inn in Columbus for our wedding night. I was aggravated a lot with Chris, but never this aggravated before. I was wearing my wedding gown and walking back towards Lancaster on Route 33, glad that for the reception I had changed into a pair of white canvas sneakers with sequins that my cousin Linda had decorated for the wedding. I knew that I wouldn't want to wear high heels all night. I'm a big girl, and I wasn't going to miss dancing at my own reception because my feet hurt too bad. But I was still wearing my wedding dress and veil. Chris was in his F-150 pickup, driving slow so he could keep asking me to get in the truck. You wouldn't think that there were many cars on Route 33 at that time of the morning, but there were, and they kept slowing down and carefully passing. Some guy called out the window, "I'll give you a ride, honey." I gave him the finger. Please get in the truck, Kayla, Chris said. Wasn't talking to him. Usually when I got angry, I started crying, which always loses you any sort of chance you have of making a point. But I was so mad that night, I never even shed a tear. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you," Chris said. I couldn't stand that. "Just how are you going to make it up to me?" I said. "How are you going to give me back my wedding night?" He looked at me with big puppy eyes and said, "Don't be like that, Kayla." It had been a really nice wedding. I saved the money. My dad's on disability, so I wasn't going to ask him for it. I'm an assistant manager at McDonald's, and I'd taken a second job working for Allwood Florists. All last fall, I made Christmas ornaments, wooden soldiers and Santas and reindeer. I sold them at craft shows. The biggest sellers were dog bone ornaments that I would personalize with the dog's name. I worked my butt off. Marty at Allwood gave me an employee rate for my wedding flowers, red roses and lilies. I got my dress in Pennsylvania because if you're from out of state, you don't have to pay sales tax. I spent $140 on my hair, having it highlighted. I went to the tanning salon. My dress showed off my shoulders, which are one of my best features. I really did look the best I have ever looked. And the reception went pretty good. A lot of people didn't stay, but a few people stayed until midnight. I was really proud of the job I did. Chris had gotten a roofing job for his neighbor in June and said he would put the $700 he earned towards our honeymoon. He wanted to take care of it. I gave him the money I had, and he said he'd taken care of it. We were going to Cancun, even though everyone said it was too hot in August. But I'd never been to another country. So we were supposed to go to Columbus, spend the night, and then catch our flight in the morning. Except that while we were on our way to Columbus, Chris told me that he actually hadn't taken care of it. "Don't be mad, Kayla," he said. "Listen to me first." He and Felter and Carnegie had gone up to Windsor in June, right after the roofing job. I knew that. I figured that after we got married, he wouldn't be able to hang out with his friends as much. Besides, I was working all the time anyway, paying for the wedding. They were playing blackjack. He won a bunch of money. Almost $600, he said. I was going to use it on our honeymoon. I thought I was on a roll, you know? Chris was looking at me. He has really cute blue eyes. Usually I can't believe that a heavy girl like me got someone like Chris. So what happened, I asked. I don't know, he said. I mean, I know, but I can't explain it. I wanted to win big. I wanted to get the honeymoon suite, You worked so hard. What happened, I said. I lost the money, he said. I'm sorry. No honeymoon. He was hoping to put the Hampton Inn on his credit card, but he didn't know if he'd be able to because it was kind of close to maxed out. He'd meant to get it paid down, maybe put the whole honeymoon on it, but the alternator went on the truck and he needed it to get to work. Why didn't you tell me? I said. I didn't know what else to say. I didn't really believe him. I just couldn't think about it. It kept squirming around in my head like I understood it, but I didn't at the same time. I didn't want to ruin the wedding, he said. I had worked really hard on the wedding, but I guess I hadn't thought a whole lot about Chris. I was looking at him, and it occurred to me that the reason that Chris was with a girl like me was because he was a fuck-up. I just never admitted it to myself. Stop the truck, I said. I knew I couldn't walk all the way back to Lancaster, so I finally called Sarah, my best friend and maid of honor. Then I sat down on the berm and waited. Chris pulled the truck off the road and stood looking awkward. He started to sit down next to me, but I said, "Don't sit down. That tux is rented and I'm not paying extra if you get it dirty." While I was waiting for her, I told Chris I was going to get the marriage annulled. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It's like a divorce, only it's like the wedding never happened," I said. "But it did happen," he said. "It was never consummated," I said. I don't even know where I had heard about that. He didn't understand what I meant by that either. "We didn't have sex on our wedding night." "We've been having sex for 2 years," he said. "We had ever since I was 17 and in my junior year at high school, and he was thinking he would go into the army when he graduated. I figured if I had sex with him, he'd stay. But we didn't do it tonight," I said, "so it doesn't count." I moved to Cleveland because my cousin Donna lives there. Donna's the opposite of me physically. She's short and skinny and has dark brown hair. She has the family boobs, though. She weighs 105 pounds, and the joke is that 50 pounds of it is on her chest. She's in nursing school, and she said I could get a job at the hospital. I never wanted to be a nurse, but she said there were lots of jobs in the hospital, and I could stay with her. I got a job in the kitchen, which was fine. The hospital is the Cleveland Clinic, which is probably the world's biggest hospital. It's a lot bigger than Lancaster. Not in square miles, but I bet more people work at the Cleveland Clinic than live in Lancaster, Ohio. It's really modern. Lots of buildings with green glass. Rich foreigners like sheiks come there when they're sick. The kitchens have to make all sorts of food. Diabetic food, low-protein food, low-fat food, Muslim food, Jewish food. It's a lot more interesting than McDonald's. I'd never worked with so many black people before. There are black people in Lancaster, but not many of them. Black people at the Cleveland Clinic, a lot of them were real ghetto. Sometimes, if they were talking to each other, I couldn't understand what they were saying. I'd always liked country, for one thing. I didn't like hip-hop. Donna was great about me living there, but it was a pain. I thought about going back to Lancaster. In a lot of ways, living in Cleveland wasn't a whole lot different than living in Lancaster, except it took a lot longer to get to work. My marriage had been annulled. It turned out sex didn't have anything to do with it. Chris kept calling me and asking me to come home. I asked if he could take me out on a date. He showed up at Donna's with a dozen roses and got down on one knee. Then he'd call collect when he was drunk and cry. I was talking to my dad one night. I called him every Tuesday and complaining about Chris, and my dad said, "Well, Kayla, what did you expect?" "I expect him to act like a man," I said. My dad chuckled, and I knew he was thinking that was too much to expect of Chris. It occurred to me that maybe my dad had figured out what Chris was like a long time ago. "Do you like Chris?" I asked. "It doesn't matter now, does it?" my dad said. I could just picture him sitting in the recliner. My dad lives in Chauncey. He used to work for Diamond before they closed the mill, and then he worked at Lancaster Correctional. So I grew up in Lancaster. But when he had to stop working on account of his back. He moved back to Chauncey with my grandmother. Chauncey is about the size of one floor of one building of the Cleveland Clinic. When he said that, I knew he had never really thought much of Chris, although he was always nice to him and they joked. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. He sighed. I thought he was going to say that he didn't want to interfere. "I thought you wanted to wear the pants," he said. I'd always wanted a strong man, or thought I did. Maybe I thought a pickup truck and talking about the Army meant Chris was a strong guy. Or maybe my dad was right. Maybe I wanted to wear the pants. Maybe I hadn't really been fair to Chris. But when he called, I would say to myself, "Be fair, Kayla." And the sound of his voice would make this feeling rise up in me, like the feeling of teeth scraping together, or that weird rubbing noise that my car was making. Kind of a clicking noise. It was kind of hard to hear, and so I found myself listening to it and getting more and more tense as I drove to work. That's what talking to Chris was like. I got tenser and tenser while he talked. My car was sounding like my relationship with Chris, so of course one day it stopped working altogether. It was the timing belt. It cost me $74 to get it towed. Then they told me that it would cost over $600 to get it fixed, and that I was lucky I was on Euclid and not on the highway, because if it had been on the highway it might have thrown a rod, and then I might as well just get a new car. I don't even know what throwing a rod is, but I sort of picture pieces of metal flying through the hood or something. The next time Chris called, I told him about it. For the first time in a long time, he perked up. Yeah, you could have been in big trouble." "I am in big trouble," I said. "I'm taking the bus to work. The bus is creepy and it takes forever. It's going to cost $600 to get the car fixed." I was trying to save money to get a place of my own and let poor Donna have her apartment back. But I didn't have $600, and I was going to have to put it on my credit card. My credit card still had stuff on it from the wedding. Donna was paying for nursing school and only working 2 days a week at the hospital. "So are you going to come home?" he asked. "I'd rather die," I said. Donna's dad, my Uncle Jim, loaned me the money to get my car fixed, and I promised to pay him back $100 a month. One of the girls in the kitchen told me about medical studies, how she got paid $100 to take cough medicine every day for 2 weeks. She told me where to check out the list of studies, and during my dinner break, I went about 6 blocks to the building where she told me. I got lost once. I know how to get to where I park and then to where I work, but the rest of the place is still a maze. There was a list of stuff, but nothing like the cough medicine study. It was all weird stuff, studies on depression, on taking estrogen. I looked over the whole list and couldn't find a thing I qualified for. While I was looking, a guy came to look too. He looked healthy. He was a couple years older than me, short, built like a wrestler, if you know what I mean. He wrote down the info on the psoriasis study. "What is that?" I asked. "It's a skin problem," he said. "Your skin gets dry and flaky." That sounded vaguely possible, although mostly my skin is too oily. "My feet get that way," I said. "Would that be enough?" "To be psoriasis?" He said. "Probably not. But you don't have to have psoriasis to be in the study. They need healthy people for comparison. Tell Lisa you want on the list." I did. She asked me about my psoriasis, and I told her I didn't have it. She nodded and put me down. 2 weeks later, I got called to be in the control group, and that was my first medical study. Psoriasis studies are pretty good. I got $150 to put cream on and be examined once a week for 12 weeks. $50 a month toward what I owed Uncle Jim helped a lot. I got a job at a catering hall as a cook and left the clinic, but I kept doing medical studies. A study on asthma got me enough to cover the deposit on an apartment, which was good because Donna had met Ted, and they were talking marriage, and they sure didn't need me around the apartment. She graduated from nursing school, and one November day as I walked from the parking garage at the clinic, I realized that I'd lived in Cleveland for 3 years. The wind cut between the buildings the way it always does. The streets were a mess of slush. I was looking for a study so I could save money for a trip to Cancun in February. The idea for the trip had started in the fall when I called Sarah, who'd been my maid of honor, and she told me Chris was getting married again. I knew I shouldn't care. I wasn't even seeing a guy. Not that I wanted Chris. And I had a great life, good friends. 4 of us were going. 2 girls I worked with and another friend I had met at Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers hadn't been much of a success for me or for Melinda, but we started going out to movies and hanging out. We call ourselves the Fat Fab Four. Mel started it, she really is fab. She wears jeans and skirts, and I can remember her taking off like 400 silver bracelets to get weighed. I love her style. Everybody had heard the story of how I didn't get to go to Cancun on my honeymoon. Mel had a friend who was a travel agent, and she got us a great deal. 7 days, all-inclusive, for $1,400 a piece. So it was the Fat Fab Four, not a honeymoon vacation. Lisa was still working the desk. She said, "Hi, Kayla, I haven't seen you for a while." I hadn't done a study for ages. I could still use the money, but I'd been busy with the FF4. I studied the list, but nothing looked good. Some things I just won't do. Anything that looks like it will hurt. I did a burn cream study once where they actually gave me a little burn on my butt. Hurt like hell. So now I'm more careful. I was frowning. Lisa said, "What about the pulmonary study?" I shook my head. "I'm going out of town." Pulmonary study required that I be available for 4 months. The whole point of doing a study was to help pay for Cancun, not cancel it. "This just came in," Lisa said. "Have you ever done a phase 1 drug trial?" I'd done some drug trials, but they were all for stuff like psoriasis and the burn study. This paid $2,000. It was for a leukemia drug. I'd never done something where you have to take a serious drug. But $2,000 was a lot. The whole trip in spending money. I only wanted 12 people. She handed me the fact sheet. It had all the usual warnings. Drug is untested in humans, risk. Normally I wouldn't have done anything like this, but the chance to make $2,000 seemed like too good to pass up, like it was almost fate, you know? I don't know that I believe in fate, especially now, but it seemed that way at the time, so I signed up. The trial was on a Thursday afternoon. To get the day off, I had to swap with someone else, which meant working a double on Saturday. Wedding in the morning and another wedding in the evening. At least in the evening I'd be doing bar, which wasn't so bad. Handing out glasses of wine and beer to happy drunken wedding guests. Thursday I went to the medical lab out on Cedar Road. The Cleveland Clinic has 3 zones, and it's all about patients. The front zone is where the patients first see the hospital, the lobbies, the doctor's offices. It's really nice. Nice carpeting, nice wood, nice chairs, tables, plants, artworks. Then there's the middle zone, places like the surgical staging areas and the hospital rooms. Hospital rooms try to be nice, but they have to have all this equipment, and it's not like television. It's kind of like cluttered and busy, and there will be stacks of blankets and boxes of latex gloves. Everything feels a little crowded. There's no art on the walls of the ER and the outpatient staging and recovery room. Then there's the back zone, maintenance and the kitchen, offices, and the places where the actual technicians do the lab work, basements, closets, hard light and not enough light, notices and memos stuck to the wall, employees must wash hands before returning to work, mandatory meeting on health coverage changes, waste stock tracking sheets. That was the kind of place where the drug trial took place. It was a pretty large room with no windows and a linoleum floor. It had one of those long folding tables like you see in a school cafeteria. On the table were vials and cotton swabs, syringes and gloves. A nurse was sitting in a folding chair, reading a paperback. There were 10 of us, all guys except for me and one other woman. A lab tech checked us off on a clipboard, and we all had a packet sitting on a plastic chair. "Please sit in the chair with your packet," the guy with the clipboard said. "The dosages have been calculated based on your weight, and if you sit in someone else's chair, that could compromise the study." Then he came up to each of us, asked us our name and our birth date, and gave us each a hospital bracelet with all that and an ID number on it. He explained how we would be asked the same thing again before receiving the injection, but that was just to make sure there were no slip-ups. Then he explained about double-blind trials. No one in this room, he explained, knew which of us was getting the drug for testing and which was getting the placebo, which was just an injection of saline. He explained phase 1 drug testing. The point of this test, he explained, was not to determine if the drug worked, but just to confirm that it was safe for people. The drug, the one we were getting, had been extensively tested on rabbits and monkeys. Rabbits and monkeys, of course, could not report adverse effects, so we were to report any adverse effects we experienced. We would be getting a much smaller dose than the rabbits and monkeys. I was the second person in the line of chairs. The guy sitting next to me was wearing a plaid shirt and thermal undershirt and work boots. He looked like he did construction. "You ever done this before?" I asked. He nodded. "I've done 2 others, but they didn't pay as good as this." A nurse came and asked him his name, date of birth, and ID number. She took a blood sample from him and then wrote his ID number on the label and stuck it on. Then she did the same thing to me. As she moved down the chairs, I looked in my packet. The drug we were taking didn't have a real name. It was just called GNTII46. It was for leukemia, lupus, and MS, which I will tell you made me feel a little glad. It's hard to think you're doing much for humanity when you're getting paid not to have psoriasis in a psoriasis study. But what if this drug really cured people with MS? I said that to the guy in the flannel shirt. He kind of looked at me. It made me think a little of Chris. I don't know why. Maybe just because he was wearing a Ford cap. "Is that why you're doing this?" he asked me. "Hell no," I said. "I need the money to go to Cancun." That made him grin. "Yeah, that sounds good," he said. He didn't know what he was going to do with the money. He heard about it from his cousin's girlfriend who was working somewhere doing some kind of paperwork for medical stuff. He figured he should pay down his credit card, but he was also thinking of saving it toward a down payment on a motorcycle. The guy with the clipboard started talking, so we shut up, although all he did was tell us the same thing that was in the packet and make us all sign that we understood the risks. It was just like school. I underlined phase 1 drug trial, 10 to 20 healthy adults. Phase 2, something like 50 sick people. If the stuff doesn't seem to be as good as what people get anyway, then they stop. Otherwise, they go on to phase 3. I wondered what it would be like to have leukemia and find out the experimental drug you're working didn't do as good as what normal people get. I decided I was probably not brave enough for phase 2 if I ever got leukemia. Phase 3 is a couple of thousand sick people in it. Most drugs never get beyond phase 2, the guy with the clipboard explained. About that time, I admit I zoned out. One of the fluorescents was in the flicker before dying stage, and it was annoying me. We'd been there for over an hour before the nurse finally started giving us injections. The guy in the flannel shirt took off his shirt and rolled up his thermal undershirt, and the nurse wrote down the time and his ID number. She asked me my name and birth date and ID number, but she didn't give me the shot. I asked why. "We wait 2 minutes between injections," she said. "Watching for green and purple spots," the guy putting it back, said the guy putting him back on his flannel shirt. "Purple and pink," she said. We all 3 grinned. Finally, I got my shot. Then I had to sit there while they gave the next 8 people the shot, wondering if my growing headache was a drug effect or the result of the bad fluorescent light. After the last person had gotten the shot, I thought maybe we would fill out some paperwork and be told when to come back for follow-up, but we all still sat there. I figured we'd been told how long we would sit there sometime after I stopped paying attention. I was embarrassed to admit I had, so I sat there thinking about where I was going to go to eat when I left. I finally decided I could ask Mr. Green and Purple Spots. I started to say something just as he said, "I don't feel so good." "What's wrong?" I asked. "I feel sick," he said, "like I got a fever." He was shaking. "Hey," I said to get the nurse's attention, "this guy doesn't feel good." He took off his flannel shirt. "Burning up," he said, and rubbed his head hard. She came over and asked him to describe how he felt. "Is this an adverse effect?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. Just our luck, I thought. We get a nurse who doesn't know what she's doing. But now I wonder if they just weren't allowed to say anything, or probably she really didn't know if he just happened to be sick or not. "Can I have an aspirin or something?" he asked. "Let's wait a bit," she said. I didn't know what to do. Everyone else was leaning forward, looking at us, looking at the sick guy. "What's wrong with him?" someone asked the clipboard guy. "I don't know," the clipboard guy. After a few minutes, the guy on the other side of me said, "I feel sick." The nurse came over and laid her hand against his forehead. I was surprised she didn't have one of those temperature thingies that they stick in your ear. This guy was shaking too. "I'm going to be sick," he said. The nurse ran and grabbed the trash can and he vomited into it. My stomach rose and I looked away. I thought maybe we weren't supposed to leave our seats, but when the flannel shirt guy threw up, I got up and walked over to the wall. "Are you all right?" the clipboard guy asked me. "I think so," I said, although I didn't know. Then the fourth person started throwing up. God, said the first guy, my head feels like it's exploding. Everybody who wasn't throwing up was looking at me, or looking at the fifth person, who was the other woman. She was a black woman, maybe in her 30s. She looked scared. Can I have something for the pain, please, said the first guy. The third guy was lying on the floor now, and the nurse was kneeling next to him. He's dizzy, she said, I think from spiking a fever. She pointed to the table where the cotton swabs and stuff were and said to the guy from the clipboard, there's packets of Tylenol over there, give him one. Clipboard guy said to her, should I call the EMTs? I don't know, she said, this is your protocol. She's not sick, he pointed to the black woman. She might be a placebo, said the nurse. How many placebos are there? I don't know, he said. God, said the first guy. God, please, my head. The nurse got him a Tylenol, by which time it seemed a little like pouring a glass of water on a house fire. I want to go home, the first guy said. Call my girlfriend. I don't care about the money. I just want to go home. You stay there, the nurse said. You're better here than at home. The clipboard guy was on his cell phone to someone. I think you better send a doctor, I heard him say. And then he saw me watching him and turned his back to us so he was facing the wall. The black woman didn't get sick. The guy next to her didn't get sick. And then the guy next to him seemed okay, although I hadn't been watching the time, so I didn't know how long it had been. Time was going so slow. Then the next guy said, oh man, I feel it. It was like that story in the Bible where the Israelites want to leave Egypt and they smear blood on their doors and God sends the angel of death to slay all the firstborn but passes over the houses marked with lamb's blood, except we didn't know who had been marked and who had been saved. A doctor showed up in about half an hour, but by that time they'd called the EMTs. 6 people had gotten the drug and 4 were placebos, and the placebos were all standing around not looking at each other or looking at the sick guys. They loaded the sick ones into ambulances. The nurse was standing there in the hallway holding her fist to her mouth like she was trying not to cry. I wanted to ask her if anything had ever happened like this before, but it was pretty clear no one had a clue. I drove home. I stopped on the way home and got a hamburger, but it seemed strange to eat it. I felt like I should be so upset I couldn't eat, like that ever happened. When I got home, I thought to check my cell phone. I had turned it off when I got to the medical trial because in Cleveland Clinic, we weren't supposed to have our cell phones on inside the building. There was a message from a representative of the company that was doing the study asking me to call. I called my friend Mel instead and told her what had happened, and she said she'd come over as soon as she got off work. The phone rang as soon as I hung up, and it was News Channel 5. I told them I didn't know if I was allowed to talk, but when they asked me if I could confirm that 6 people had gotten sick, I said that was true. Then the newspaper called. My cell kept ringing and ringing until I finally shut it off and turned on the TV. Mel got there just about the time that it came on the news, so I almost missed the first part. Not that it was very exciting. The newswoman with the really stiff, unmoving newscaster hair said that 6 people went to the hospital in a drug trial that had gone horribly wrong. The 6 men were hospitalized in critical condition with multiple organ failures. Then they showed the outside of a hospital, not Cleveland Clinic, maybe University Hospital? Fuck, Mel said, that's so stupid. I didn't know what she meant. Showing the outside of a hospital, it's just a building. I said, it's where they are. So, she said, what does showing you the hospital tell you? It's like when they're talking about a car accident and they show you this perfectly normal stretch of road with the cars whizzing by. Mel was really mad. It seemed like a weird thing to be mad about. It's wrong, she said. When she lifted her hands, her bangles jingled. It makes everything seem normal. They have to show something, I said, although that sounded lame. No, they don't, she said. We could go back to Miss My Hair Wouldn't Move in a Hurricane. She shook her head. I don't know. Are you okay? Yeah, I said. Nothing happened to me. I don't know why it pisses me off so much. She said, it's just the news. The next day they had the interview with the girlfriend of one of the guys who got sick. She said that her boyfriend was in a coma and his head had swelled up to 3 times its normal size and he looked like the Elephant Man. I didn't think she should have said that. She should have given him his dignity. All day at work I told people what had happened. People had wanted to know if I was going to sue. For what? They had told us that there was a risk. They've got to test drugs or people would still be dying of plague and polio. It wasn't anybody's fault. It was just something that happened. I explained it over and over again, but people kept saying to me, "Are you going to sue?" On Saturday, I was so tired of the whole thing, I didn't want to talk about it anymore. I wished I could find out what happened to the construction guy, the guy in the flannel shirt. 4 other guys were out of ICU in a couple days, and I hoped he was one of them. I hoped he wasn't the guy whose girlfriend had said his head swelled up. Then, the news stopped talking about it. It was almost like it had never happened. I got a check from the company that did the drug trial, and I put it in my bank account. It was weird because in some ways it was a bigger deal when Chris and I got our marriage annulled. People talked about that for a long time, and not just in Lancaster. But even Mel didn't talk to me about the drug trial thing unless I brought it up. It didn't bother me, not really. I think about it sometimes. I'm not doing any more medical trials. I figure I gave it my all for science already. But other than that, it's just something that happened. We went to Cancun, not a honeymoon trip to Cancun. We stayed in a resort hotel with a pool and went halfway around the hotel and had 2 swim-up bars. Being in Mexico, I thought everything would be more foreign, but in Cancun, things felt a lot like the same. There was McDonald's, KFC, and Pizza Hut, and even Walmart. Mel said it looked just like Florida, only more people speak Spanish in Florida. Still, it was incredibly fun. You walk out of the hotel and down to the road, and this bus comes along. There's no schedule because they just take you from the Zona Hotelera to the downtown. It costs 50 cents. We partied a lot because even if we got trashed, it didn't matter. There was this one club that sold drinks that were 2 feet tall. We'd been to Cochabongo the night before, which was great, but it was too crowded to dance. So we just picked this place at random because it had a dance floor. They had those long, skinny glasses, red and blue plastic. I was sick of margaritas, but all you could get were margaritas and daiquiris, so I was on my 3rd daiquiri. Usually I could drink pretty much. I started to feel kind of sick, Cancun catching up with me, I figured. I found the bathroom, I rinsed my face off, careful to keep my mouth tightly closed. I didn't want to get Montezuma's revenge. I overheard these 2 girls talking. They were thin and blonde, and it was clear that they had never worked at McDonald's in their lives. One was saying to the other, "I don't know if I want to come back here anymore." The other one asked where she wanted to go instead, and they talked about Hawaii or Miami or something. I hated them. I don't know why. They were probably nice enough, but I just hated them. I thought, I almost died to get here. I still felt a little sick and dizzy, and I went in one of the stalls and sat on the edge of the toilet. Usually I don't want to touch anything in a public bathroom. Maybe it all just hit me. I don't know. I had heard that all the guys lived, although I suspected none of them was exactly ready to come to Cancun. I had specks dancing in front of my eyes. I put my head down on my knees and took deep breaths, and I tried not to think about my head swelling up so that I couldn't open my eyes. I'm okay, I thought. I'm okay. Someone called, "Are you all right?" It was Mel, jingling with bracelets. "Yeah," I said, "I'm fine." "Are you sick?" I was actually feeling better. So I stood up and flushed the toilet and came out. "It's okay," I said. "I think I've just been drinking too fast." The music was disco. The beat was thumping. I went out and I started dancing too. My head was still kind of light, and as I was dancing, I felt lighter and lighter, not in a bad way, but in a good way. I thought about those girls in the bathroom and what it would be like to be able to decide to go to Hawaii. About what it would be like to be them, or to have gotten the other kind of injection. I thought about luck. I could think about that, or I could dance. Right now, I wanted to dance. It didn't seem like a bad choice. Questions or comments? Yeah?
Did you ever do a medical experiment
I did a medical experiment when I was in 6th grade, but it was for gel cough medicine. But that's based on a medical experiment that actually took place in England for a drug that was supposed to affect T1 cells, which are part of your immune system. That went horrifically wrong, and all of the symptoms that are described in the drug trial are from descriptions of and the line about it was tested on rabbits and monkeys the drug in that drug trial had been tested extensively on specifically rabbits and monkeys and had not done anything to them. And yet in human T1 cells, it stripped one of the proteins off of the cells, and your immune system went bonkers and attacked everything in your body. And within a period of time, people were passing out. Multiple organ failure nearly killed like 3 of them. And for some reason, I just could not stop thinking about that medical experiment. I play fast and loose in here a little bit with medical experiments in that they would never do a mixed gender study on a drug like that. It would all be men, it would all be men between the ages of something and something. And
That's okay. So, artistic licenses.
so.
What's that? I didn't find it as depressing. So that
Yeah, neither did I actually.
Yes, it's a mini apocalypse. It's actually much less depressing than the.
So I'm kind of interested in terms of genre, because of course you mostly write science fiction. So this actually sort of straddles the line between realistic fiction and speculative fiction. So
Right.
what did you think of the genre when you were writing it?
I knew I was sort of on the border, that the only thing that's even remotely speculative in it is that there's a drug trial.
Yeah.
But in a sense, science fiction is pretty broad church to me. I mean, alternate history is science fiction, and that doesn't make any sense if you think about it. It seemed to me that it was a story, a fiction story about science, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
So I decided, fuck it.
Where did it get bought for the first time?
I wrote it for the collection.
Oh, okay.
Well, actually, I didn't write it for the collection. I wrote it and I hadn't done anything with it, and I was putting the collection together with Gavin Grant from Small Beer Press.
Well, what collection is this that you read?
It's called After the Apocalypse.
Ah.
Small Beer Press.
Hey.
Small Beer Press, yes. And Gavin had published my first collection, which was called Mothers and Other Monsters, which I thought, it's insane to publish collections because they don't make any money. And so, luckily, it did make him some money and me a little money. So then he said, I'll publish your second collection. And I thought, are you insane? Just because we won the lottery once? And so I thought it would help the collection if there was more unpublished stuff in it. So there were 3 unpublished stories, and that was one of them.
Well, I mean, one of the things I really love about your work is that you've got, you're one of the best at sort of incorporating realistic textures and either futuristic or science fiction or alternate history
Thanks.
things. So it's not, it doesn't seem odd to me that you would, write a story that basically could be placed in, a mainstream literary fiction. But yeah, because it's the same techniques, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. In fact, lately I've been trying to get myself to think of more science fiction-y things. But the story that actually came to me most recently that I'm going to be starting working on is soon as I get a chance. My husband volunteers once a week at the Page Museum, which is the La Brea Tar Pits. So I want to set a story in the fishbowl in the lab where they put the fossils together of the La Brea Tar Pits. Is it time?
No.
No.
Not at all.
So, okay. So, I know hey Bob, is Shelley a paleontologist?
I'm sorry.
Is Shelley a paleontologist? Is that her job title, technically?
No, she's manages the lab or whatever.
She's the head of the
She
lab.
has a paleontology degree. She has a degree in history.
Yeah, I know, but what she does is paleontology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's really, really good at identifying little fragments of bone. She can tell you what it is, where it's from, how old it is.
So, the story I'm thinking of is people come to the museum with bones and rocks and
Pieces of concrete.
pieces of concrete, yes, and say, can you tell me what this is? And Shelley, if they make an appointment, Shelley will meet with them and she'll say, It's a rock. I don't know that much about rocks, but I can tell you this, and then if you want more information, go here, or she can say, it's a really pretty rock, but it's not really anything, which happens apparently a lot. And when they bring her bones, she says most of the time, the bones are not that old. They've been in the desert for 20 years, and somebody finds it, and she says, this has been in the desert for 20 years, and it's a coyote bone. And she'll say it's a coyote rib. And she then will get very specific and tell them far more probably about the bone than they ever expected. In that area of Los Angeles, there are asphalt seeps. And sometimes people do actually bring her bones from the asphalt seep that are really, actually old bones. But I thought, what if somebody brought her in a bone that was only like 10 years old, but the animal had been extinct for 10,000 years? So I want to write that story. I just don't know what happens next. So, and I have been in, because I've eaten lunch with Bob, and I know the people, and I know the volunteers. It would be really fun because I have all those little fun details. I know that when you work in the fishbowl, which is the lab, it has a big glass front, and that kids do all sorts of weird things at the glass window to try, it's soundproof to try to get your attention.
Yeah.
I also happen to know that my husband listens to Dan Savage podcasts while small children are. Turns his iPod upside down so they can't see what's playing. So I just think all those details would be really fun in the middle of this story. So. And again, the problem is here, I was thinking, I'll do this really interesting, but this is almost a story that could happen. Except for the, dire wolf that's only 10 years old, or whatever.
Is your collection connected stories or not?
Not connected at all. Not at all.
Except by a general sense of apocalyptic.
General sense of disaster, either personal
There's
or...
no characters that carry from one to another.
No, not at all. In some of them, though, the disaster is, the zombies have taken over, and the infrastructure of civilization is breaking down. And in some of them, like this, the apocalypse is much more personal. So, yeah.
I was curious about after the apocalypse, that story.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have Cormac McCarthy's The Road in mind when you wrote it?
I had two things in mind. One was that, yes, I find the central relationship in Cormac McCarthy's The Road completely unconvincing. There's a lot of things. I love Cormac McCarthy. There's a line in The Crossing that makes the hair stand up in the back of my neck. But Cormac McCarthy, I found out after I read The Road, he's not a young man, and he had, at the time he was writing The Road, a 6-year-old son who he would never see be 35. He's too old. And I thought that this extraordinarily perfect child at the center of The Road and the extraordinarily precious relationship between the father and son said as much about Cormac McCarthy as it did. Of course, when we write, that's what we do. And the other thing is, about 15 years ago, Kelly Link said to me, my first collection of stories is called Mothers and Other Monsters. I was at Sycamore Hill, which is a writing workshop run now by Richard Butler, who just snuck out. There you are. You didn't sneak out. It was founded by John Kessler and some of his friends. And I was working on a story that would be part of Mothers and Other Monsters, my first collection. And Kelly Link said to me, the mothers in your stories often make bad choices. They often make... I have a story called Frankenstein's Daughter in which the choice they made was to have their dead daughter cloned. Bad choice. Doesn't go well for the family. She said, but they are basically good people struggling very hard, doing the best they can. She said, write a story about a bad mother, which was so terrifying it took me 15 years to do. And that story is After the Apocalypse, which is the last story in my collection, which is about A woman who's pretty much a bad mom. Just for all, and it's funny, somebody told me they read the story about how much they hated her. And I don't find her hateful at all. I think she should never have been a mom. I think she's tough and she's got a lot of denial going on, but.
Well, it's easy to trace why she does what she does if you buy her logic,
Yeah,
but the problem is that her logic is kind of.
her logic was all denial and self-absorbed and, yeah.
Right. But I mean, she can justify her actions to herself.
Well, I mean, Hitler justified his actions to himself, you know, yes.
Which is my point, yeah.
Yeah.
Because from the inside of a person, you don't, or a bad quote-unquote person, you don't feel bad.
Right, right. So,
And you wrote it in her voice, which is pretty, that's, yeah, it's hard.
it was scary to write. I didn't want to know that there was that person, that voice inside me. So. This one was easier to write. I grew up with people like Kayla. I was overweight for years and years and years and years and years, and all the issues of weight that she has, which I thought she handled much better than I do. I know people like Kayla, and she was fun to write because she's also feisty, and she's smart, just uneducated. I just really liked her, so she was fun. She told her story to me pretty well. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate your sitting through the whole story.
For that.